In 1977, Sheldon Vanauken wrote what would become an award-winning novel, a story, a true story actually, about his relationship with his wife, Davy, a good friend, C.S. Lewis, and the journey of faith, entitled A Severe Mercy. When Vanauken, otherwise known as Van, met his wife, known as Davy, the two of them had resolved that they would commit to putting their love for one another above everything else. They called this the shining barrier. That nothing would come between them ever. That they would be so committed to their own love that everything else would pale in comparison. And through their journeys of life, they had maintained this commitment to love one another above everything else. Their journeys had taken them to, I believe it was Yale, then on to Oxford, where they met C.S. Lewis, and they discovered a group of very witty, smart, intelligent Christians who were holy and happy. This provoked in them a sense of searching out the meaning of life and the meaning of faith, and they began to explore it. And as they explored it, Davy became very open to the realities of the Christian faith. Their journeys would take them from Oxford then to Virginia, where Van would be teaching at a college. And while he was there, they had formed a small group of students to study God's Word. And Davy continued in this hungry quest to know God. It became such an unquenchable thirst for her that for Van, he became jealous of her and jealous of God, because suddenly her love for God was breaking the shining barrier. That the love that they had prioritized, it felt like Davy was suddenly being committed more to God and Jesus Christ. But during their time there, Davy had come down with a virus. She was given a time frame of about a year to live, and then within a matter of months, the virus ended up taking her life. Van, in his grief and sorrow, had been corresponding with C.S. Lewis. And in his correspondence with C.S. Lewis, he began to wrestle with He wrestled with the fact that this shining barrier had been broken, it seemed, by God, and the great grief that he had in the loss of Davy. Without her, Van realized he just had lost what had been everything to him. And he wrote, "I didn't want God aboard. He was too heavy. I wanted him approving from a considerable distance. I didn't want to be thinking of him. I wanted to be free. I didn't want us to be swallowed up in God. I wanted holidays from the school of Christ." But it was a result of Van's friendship and his correspondence with C.S. Lewis that he would come to understand that the loss of Davy was not in a sense God's harshness, but as the book title tells us, it was a severe mercy. A severe mercy that would cause him to look at things in a totally different way. We love the idea of mercy. Mercy, it's something that when we receive it, it comes to us and it truly is overwhelming. It's truly delightful. We love to receive mercy because in those moments where we don't get what we deserve, we are incredibly grateful. But mercy does have a severe side to it. And in Numbers 20 and 21, we have two incidences in the history of Israel that point to the severity of mercy. You see, in the severity of God's mercy, what he is doing is he weans us from all earthly things so that we would rely upon him and him alone. And those severe mercies, they can feel painful and crippling to us for a time. But when we have the eyes of faith to understand what God is doing, we might regard God as holy, and we might believe in him. And so this morning from Numbers 20 and 21, there's only one thing that I want us to see. I want us to see the kindness in the severity of God. In Numbers 20, when we come to this passage that I just read, the people have been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And we are told in verse 1 that the people of Israel, the whole congregation, came into the wilderness of Zin in the first month, and the people stayed at Kadesh. And we're told Miriam, this is the sister of Moses and Aaron, died there and was buried there. Here they are. They've been waiting to go into the promised land, but as we saw last week in Numbers 13 and 14, the people could not enter because they had unbelief. They had been told by God he was giving them this good land. It was promised to them. And yet, this land that God had promised to Abraham and to his descendants, they could not enter when the spies came back and gave both a good and an evil report. And as a result of that, from chapters 14 on through now to chapter 20, we're about 40 years that have passed. And the result of the disobedience and unbelief in Numbers 14, we were told, was that the entire generation from 20 and up would die in the wilderness, that they would not see the promised land. And we see that now Miriam dies, just as all of this unbelieving generation would do. And so the hope was that there would be a new generation, a new people who would go into the land and embrace it by faith. And so 40 years passes, a generation is dying off, and we come to verse 2, and what we find is that the problem that Israel faced when they first came into the wilderness is the same problem that they face now. Now there was no water for the congregation, we're told in verse 2. And what Israel does is exactly the same as what they did in Exodus 20 or Exodus 17. When they first came out of the land of slavery and bondage, they came into the wilderness, and just a few months out, they were already grumbling and complaining. And this is what Israel does here again. They begin to grumble and they begin to complain about Moses. They repeat the same mistakes. And so the hope that the generation that has died off, that their sins have died off, proves to be false. That this generation is repeating the same mistakes as the generation before them. The exact same complaints are given in verse 3. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "Would we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord? Why have you brought this assembly of the Lord into this wilderness, that we should die here, both we and our cattle?" Exactly the same as in Exodus 17. The same complaints, the same quarrels. A different people with their cattle, just like in Exodus 17. And as they grumble and they complain, we're told, against Moses. They're complaining about his leadership. They're complaining about his lack of leading them all these years. And yet, what does Moses do in the face of all of the grumbling and complaining? We're told that Moses and Aaron, in verse 6, went from the presence of the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them, and the Lord spoke to Moses. After all of the accusations, after all of the grumbling and complaining about Moses' leadership, the pattern that we see, we'll see it here in Numbers 20 and again in Numbers 21, is that Moses is the elder of Israel. He shows us what eldering is like. He shows us what it means to pastor with excellence. As a leader, he hears the grumbling and complaining. It's against him. Why did you do this? Why did you bring us out here? There's no water. There's no food. There's no figs and pomegranates. We would have rather been in Egypt. We would have rather been slaves, is the implication. You're terrible. Why did you do this to us? And like every spiritual leader, there is the need to, one, forgive, And 2, pray for those people. You see, the need in spiritual leadership is always to constantly, repeatedly, over and over, forgive. That we're just mere humans, that we can't do it all, that we are not the redeemer, we're not the provider, we're not the rescuer, but we point to the one who is. And it requires over and over of the spiritual leader to pray and intercede. This is the first and primary task of Moses, of Aaron, and of every elder who has ever followed from this path. And as Moses then prays and seeks to forgive, the Lord says to him, I want you to go, I want you to take the staff of my authority, and I want you to speak to the rock in front of the congregation of Israel that water would come out of it. So what does Moses do? He goes to the people and he calls out their sin. You rebels, he says in verse 10. Look at your hearts. You're rebelling. And he casts a judgment upon the people of Israel. And in a moment, after all these years of faithfully praying and forgiving, hearing the grumbling, and yet continuing to lead, his anger gets the better of him. And in his moment of anger, he calls out their rebelliousness. And we're told that he strikes the rock, not once, but twice. And the result of this, we're told in verse 12, is that Moses will not be allowed to enter and lead the people into the promised land. In Exodus 17, when the people had grumbled and complained with the exact same grumblings and complaints, Moses had done the exact same thing, forgiving the people, interceding for them. He had gone to the Lord, and the Lord had said, listen, I want you to go to the rock, and I want you to take the staff and then strike the rock. And so when Moses comes to the rock in Exodus 17, we're told that the Lord stood between Moses and the rock, that the cloud of glory descended. And so when Moses was to strike the rock, he was to first be striking the cloud, if you would, striking the very servant who would be providing the water. But now here he's told not to strike the rock, but to take the staff of the authority of God and speak to the rock, and water would come out. And Moses doesn't do that. He speaks not to the rock, but to the people. And he doesn't take his staff, the staff of the authority of the Lord, and rest in God's authority, but he casts a judgment on Israel. You rebels! And he condemns Israel. He condemns them by saying, you rebels. In verse 10, he makes it clear. Shall we bring water for you out of this rock? Am I your provider? And in the place of God, where God had previously taken the blow in Exodus 17 of the staff of Moses, now Moses stands as the judge over Israel. You rebels. And as the provider for Israel. Shall we provide water from the rock? And he strikes the rock. And the result of this is, Moses, the Lord says, you did not regard me as holy, and you did not believe me, and you won't enter the land. The punishment seems severe. For striking a rock, I'm not going to be allowed to go into the land. Why is the Lord so severe? And the Lord tells him why. You didn't believe me. Instead of speaking God's word, Moses spoke his own word. He wasn't representing God, he was representing himself. He was taking the place of God, standing as the judge. And Moses, you did not regard me as holy. Here it is in this moment of anger that what Moses does is when he strikes the rock, it is as though his anger against Israel just not only overwhelms him, but he strikes the rock like he wants to strike Israel. He just wants to hit her. Because he's so angry, he's so fed up, he's so frustrated. And we're told in Psalm 106, verse 33, that it was Moses speaking rashly that caused this great sin. And as James 1:20 will say, don't you know, brothers, that it is not the anger of men that produces the righteousness of God? And yet what happens? This is where we see the mercy of God. A grumbling, complaining people, a disobedient, unbelieving leader. And in a moment of disobedience, in striking the rock, we're told in verse 11 that when he lifted up his hand, struck the rock with his staff twice, water came out abundantly. Now, when I was in Sunday school, we'd have these pictures, and even on our video today, it looks like this squirting of water that's coming out of the rock. But just stop and think for a moment about how much water was necessary. When Israel had come up out of Egypt, and when the census happens at the beginning of Numbers, we get the picture that Israel is not just a small group of people, but that there's 600,000 men who are 20 years and older. That means that there's at least that many women, and how many more children. Plus, this passage emphasizes that there was all the cattle, all their livestock with them. We're not talking about just a little squirting of water from the rock. When Moses strikes the rock, what comes out are gallons, thousands of gallons, enough to fill pools, Olympic-sized pools of water, so that Israel has enough to drink. That this is the abundant mercy of God. That this is how God provides for a rebellious people, a disobedient leader, with abundance. It's flowing with greatness. But Israel still has to wander. And in Numbers chapter 21, we are told that as Israel then moves, it is not moving forward, but rather we're told in verse 4, they set out by the way to the Red Sea. They're moving backwards. They've been in the wilderness 40 years, and now it looks like they're on their way back towards the Red Sea, back towards Egypt, not towards the Promised Land. And as they turn back, the people begin to complain, except this time in Numbers 21, the complaint that we hear is the culmination of all of the complaints that have gone on before. We're told that they complain about the food, just like in Numbers 11, verses 4 to 6. The Lord didn't provide. We hear them complain, we would rather have died in the wilderness or have gone back to Egypt, just as the people complained in chapter 14, verses 2 and 3. And they complain there is no water, just like they did in chapter 20. But the complaint this time is not merely against Moses. We're told here that the people, verse 5, spoke against God and against Moses. They have now escalated their complaint. They are angry with God. They are upset with him. And the Lord now, he disciplines these people. We're told in verse 6, the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people so that many of the people of Israel died. So Moses, again, in the midst of complaints against his leadership and his God, what does he do? Verse 7. The people came to Moses and said, we've sinned. We've spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord that he may take away the serpents from us. So Moses does what every good pastor and elder has always done. He forgives and he prays again. And in forgiving and praying, the Lord says to him, listen, Moses, verse 8, This is going to be the way that the people will be delivered. I want you to take a fiery serpent made out of bronze and put it on the top of a pole, this pole which represents authority and power. And I want you to put that serpent on the top of the pole. And then whenever an Israelite is bitten by one of the snakes, here's what they're to do. They're to look at the symbol of their own judgment. They're to look at the snake to remind them that the reason that they're being bitten by snakes is their own fault, that they've sinned. They've sinned against the Lord. And I want them to look at the pole of my authority, and I want them to look at the very symbol of their judgment, and I want them to look as an act of confession. We have sinned, and only you, Lord, can deliver us. The punishment for grumbling against God is severe. But the provision of God is this, that all who look upon the symbol of their judgment and acknowledge their sin find forgiveness and healing. This is a God who, when he's grumbled against, when his servant is accused, he provides abundant water. He provides salvation for a grumbling people. And all of this is intended to help us to see the glory of Christ. When Jesus came in John chapter 3, we're told that Jesus had the teacher of Israel come to him by night. And this teacher of Israel, who came to him in darkness, without understanding, he came, we are told in John 3, verse 3, he came in darkness and said that no one could do the signs that Jesus was doing unless God was with him. And Jesus told him, Nicodemus, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they're born again. Nicodemus, not understanding what it means to be born again, goes into this conversation. I can't go back into my mother's womb. How can I be born again? To which Jesus says to him, unless it's the Spirit of God who awakens you, only then can you be born again. And he will go on to explain to Nicodemus in verse 14 that just as Moses lifted up the serpent on that stick, that when Israel would look at the symbol of their judgment, that they would find salvation, so the Son of Man will be lifted up. That when you look upon the cross, we have that symbol there at the back of the church. When we look at that symbol, what it's to remind us of is that's our judgment. And that the serpents who bit the children of Israel, it was to remind them that they had the poisonous venom that had infected all of humanity since the Garden of Eden when the first serpent came into the garden. And that the children of Israel, who had known their powerful God, they had known the authority of God, they had let the poison of Egypt infect their heart with serpentine ways. And Jesus here to Nicodemus, you're the teacher of Israel. You should know the Scriptures. But if you would look to the Son of Man lifted up on the cross, then you would find mercy, just as Israel found mercy. That you would find that there is the forgiveness from judgment in the saving power of God. That when you look to the cross, that you would find forgiveness and mercy and help that's abounding, that flows to you. And this is precisely what Nicodemus does, because we're told in John 19, verse 34, that I think it's verse 39, that Nicodemus, he is there taking Jesus down from the cross. He is looking at the Son of Man lifted up, who has borne all of his sin for his ignorance. He comes to Jesus in John 3 in darkness, and now in John 19, the light of the glory of God is revealed to him as he sees it's my sin that put him there. I'm the one who's deserving of punishment. I'm the one who's been infected with the serpentine ways. And this is what it means to be born again. To repent is to acknowledge in humiliation, I've done tremendous sin. I've grumbled against God. I've been angry with God. And the Lord's dealings can feel quite severe. But yet, His mercy flows, just like the water that flowed from the rock and watered all of the cattle and gave the people enough to drink. So His mercy flows to you and to me, that it flows with great abounding mercy. But what about Moses? What about Moses? Where's the mercy for him? Moses has been a faithful pastor and elder. He has prayed, he has forgiven, and in a moment of anger, exhausted and tired of the grumbling and complaining, he strikes the rock like he wants to strike Israel. He speaks harshly, judging Israel, speaking words of condemnation upon the entire congregation of Israel. Where is the mercy? The mercy, it starts right in Numbers 20. Regardless of how you think we got the Old Testament, especially the first 5 books, you have to acknowledge that the stories that have come down to us, the teachings that have come down to us, they came from Moses' perspective. And Numbers 20 is Moses' confession. It's Moses recording the incident of what happened at the wilderness of Zin. It's Moses acknowledging, I failed. The reason I couldn't take you into the land and I couldn't go into the land, I sinned. And forever, Moses is remembered by his own confession. I blew it. I failed. And yet that's where the mercy begins. The mercy begins because Moses, we know he humbly acknowledged not only to that generation, but to every following generation and to ours that he sinned. And by his acknowledgement of his sin, we find a story of Jesus in Matthew 17, where Jesus takes 3 of his disciples and he goes up onto the Mount of Transfiguration. Peter, James, and John are there, and as they go up the mountain, Jesus' face begins to shine like the sun, and his clothes became white as light, we're told. And in verse 5, we're told that he was speaking when a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." And just like the cloud that had descended on Mount Sinai, that had led the people through the wilderness, had come, now it was here on this Mount of Transfiguration. All of God's glory, all of his presence, leading his people to the promised land. And who's there? And behold, there appeared to them Moses. Moses is there. Moses is in the presence of God. Moses is in the promised land. This is the glory of Christ. You may fail. Your anger might get the better of you. You might become so angry at some point that you do something that you could never imagine that you could ever do. That you can sin so recklessly and so heinously that God could say to you, I'm sorry. There's no moving forward from here. That hopes that you've had, dreams that you've had, opportunities that you've had, the Lord says, I'm sorry. There's no going forward. Because sin, when we get angry, When impatience gets the better of us, when we do not regard God as holy, when we do not believe in His word, and when we let anger consume us, it does not produce the righteousness of God. But we have a Redeemer who welcomes sinners who confess. Yes, Moses experienced a severe mercy. You won't get to the promised land, Moses. It's not by good leadership that you get to the promised land. It's not by incredible giftedness that you get to the promised land. The only way that you and I will ever get to the promised land is by the mercy of a Savior who takes you there. That's how you appear in the promised land, in the presence of God, in all of His glory and goodness. It's not by your works, but by His. And this is what Sheldon Van Auken had to realize. That as he wrote to C.S. Lewis, what he had to come to grips with was the loss of his dear wife, Davy, exposed for him his overattachment. That he had set up their love as the supreme love above everything else. And that what he had come to realize, as he and C.S. Lewis had written back and forth, was that her death, Davy's death, had now been the freedom for him to explore the realities of the love of God for him in Jesus Christ. That as long as Davy was there, he was so attached to her love that he could not explore the depths of the love that God had for him. And he came to realize that in her death there was a severe mercy. Severe that, yes, he lost Davy, but an abundant mercy that flowed to him, and that he discovered a God who deeply loved him even more than Davy had ever shown him. And now Davy, he had come to realize, was experiencing the joy and happiness that she had always longed for. And that by him losing his attachment to her, but finding his attachment in Christ, that he found what Davy had wanted for him, the deep love that God had for Van. God will wean us from every love in this earth that keeps us from loving Him. His mercy can be severe. It can be painful. But it is an abundant mercy. Because the mercy that He gives is to take you to the promised land, to guarantee that He'll get you there, so that in this life that you might remember, as the Apostle Paul says in Romans 8:18, that the sufferings that we experience now are not worth comparing to the glory to be revealed to us. So come to Him again and find that there is mercy that flows more abundantly than water from the rock in the streams of the desert, because of the one who is lifted up on the cross to take the judgment for you, that you would look to Him and find that there is mercy and help in your time of need.